It was the first day I'd taken away from the office in weeks, and it was my first opportunity to try out a brand new putter.
I don't care what anybody says, Herb. You've got great form. You really swing.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant. Now, if you'll just be quiet, I'll give you a little demonstration.
Say, Herb, do you remember the Janice case?
I'll never forget it. It's one of the few cases my father ever lost. I didn't see the trial, but I heard about it. If ever a man was sent to prison for murder on circumstantial evidence, it was Dan Janice.
Herb, it's not circumstantial anymore. They just found Temple's body under a couple of tons of concrete. He was buried under a road he and Janice were building at the time he was reported missing.
You sure it's Temple?
We're sure. The dental work checked out, and we also found a bullet hole in his skull.
What about the bullet?
We have it. We found it with the victim's remains, and we also have Dan Janice's gun, the one he kept at his mountain cabin.
Good. If the bullet didn't come from Janice's gun, it might prove his innocence.
The Marises never give up, do they? Well, we're checking on the bullet now, but it's going to take a little time. The case is in the dead files. We're going to have to get all the old evidence and records out of storage.
Brace yourself, John. You are about to see a Maris give up.
Oh, where are you going?
To review my father's file in the case.
And I don't have to pull my records out of storage.
Well, I thought you were playing golf today.
Huh.
Did Lieutenant Weston reach you?
Pull the file on the Janice case and bring it into my office, Casey.
It's on your desk. I screen your calls very carefully.
My golf game, too. Casey, you were working for my father when he handled the Janice case. How'd you feel about it?
Well, I agreed with your father. If it hadn't been for the fact that company funds were missing when Temple disappeared, there wouldn't have been a clear motive. And as far as the jury was concerned, it was a simple case of a man murdering his partner to avoid exposure.
A little too simple. As I remember, Janice insisted that Temple had taken the $40,000 and disappeared. And to keep his company from going broke, he tried to borrow small sums from private sources to cover the shortage. Apparently, the jury ignored that possibility.
It would be pretty hard to ignore it with your father in the courtroom. There just wasn't any concrete evidence to corroborate Janice's claims.
We may get that concrete evidence, Casey, and a new jury. See if you can get through to the warden state prison and arrange for me to see Janice.
Right away.
If I'd known you were ill, I would have postponed this, Mr. Janice.
They don't seem to think it's anything serious. If it turns out that that bullet came from my gun, what then?
You're not suggesting it did.
I'm only suggesting that there's nothing more they can do to me. I have no friends. My wife is gone. Even if you prove me innocent, what will it mean?
Well, you can answer that better than I can. It's your life, and what happens to it from now on may depend on that bullet.
Well, even if it came from my gun, I didn't fire it.
Has your wife been to see you since she filed for a divorce?
What has she got to do with it?
Well, apparently you still have one friend.
Riley Sherman.
Riley Sherman. He was a witness at your trial, wasn't he?
He did everything he could to convince that jury that the only thing I ever fired that gun at was a target.
So I remember he used to be in politics.
That's right. He's retired now.
I think I'll pay Mr. Sherman a little visit. Thank you, Mr. Jannison. I hope you get well, sir.
Fine.
We hunted together a lot. Dan was never much of a shot. The only time he used that pistol was at a target on a tree. It missed the whole tree. Gave it up.
Did he always keep his gun in the cabin?
Yes, his wife wouldn't let him bring it home.
And anyone with access to the cabin could have taken the gun and returned it later without Janice knowing anything about it.
I thought about it, Mr. Maris. I said as much at the courtroom, but it backfired. You see, I had as much opportunity to use that gun as anybody else. Before the DA got through with me, I was defending myself instead of Dan.
Apparently you convinced him.
Well, we had a strain for the motive a little. You see, I never met Temple. You sure you would like a drink?
No, thanks. I appreciate your time.
You must be reading my thoughts. I was about to buzz. Will you see if you can get me Mrs. Janice's present address?
Certainly. But I wasn't reading your thoughts. Mrs. Temple is here to see you.
Mrs. Temple? Well, what does she want?
She wouldn't tell me. She says her business is with you.
All right, Casey, send her in.
Won't you come in, please?
Nice to see you. Won't you sit down, Mrs. Temple?
I won't be that long. I'm here about Harriet Janice. You're doing her a great deal of harm.
Dan, Janice's former wife? How am I harming?
It says there that you're trying to reopen the Janice case. If you do, it'll ruin any chance for happiness that Harriet might have. She's had to live with what her husband did for 10 years. Now she's about to be remarried, but digging up this old case can ruin everything. Don't you see?
Well, what do you want me to do, Mrs. Temple?
Drop it. Forget the whole thing. Dan Janice killed my husband and was convicted by a jury. He was lucky to get off with a life sentence. Hasn't he caused his wife enough grief without putting her in the spotlight again?
You seem very concerned over the wife of a man who killed your own husband. I can't help wondering about your motives in coming to me.
What do you mean? Harriet and I are friends. And she had nothing to do with my husband's death.
She certainly had very little to gain, but I can't help wondering about you.
Well, I can see that you've been talking to Amy Krause. Well, if you're basing your hopes on the imaginings of a senile old woman, you've already lost your case.
Well, what did you say to her?
It was something she said to me. Did you get anything on Mrs. Janice?
2130 Bingham Street. It's a pretty runs-down section of town.
A couple of more things I want you to do for me, Casey. Go down to the county clerk's office and check out the final disposition of the assets of the Janice Temple Company.
You're primarily interested in what Mrs. Temple got out of it?
I'm interested in what anyone may have gotten out of the company being dissolved. You might start with her, though.
Mrs. Janice doesn't have a telephone listed. Where can I get in touch with you in case I find out anything?
Well, I've got to see Weston. You can leave word with him. You might ask him to try and locate Amy Krause. She was the Janice Temple bookkeeper.
Oh, yes, I remember. Your father thought she might be the key to the case, but the only thing that anyone could get out of her was the fact that her books didn't balance, and she was firmly convinced that the whole thing was a statistical error.
Well, there must be some reason why Mrs. Temple didn't want me to see her. It's possible she still may be the key to the case.
Oh.
Mrs. Janice, I'm Herbert Maris. I represent your husband.
Yes, I was expecting you, Mr. Maris. Won't you come in? Sit down. Will you join me?
Why, thank you. You said you were expecting me.
I read the papers. They said that you'd found some new evidence and were trying to reopen the case, so I assumed you'd be around.
You mean you didn't send Mrs. Temple to my office to ask me to drop the new investigation?
I certainly did not. I haven't seen her or heard of her for weeks. We don't exactly move in the same social set anymore.
I realize the hardship you've undergone, Mrs. Janice, and I'm sorry to bother you now, but I understand you plan to remarry.
Well, then, there were some plans. I don't know what this publicity about Dan is going to do to them, though. I've been a very lonely woman these last few years, Mr. Maris. And what did I have to look forward to in my marriage to Dan? A monthly visit with a wire screen between us and a guard standing behind him. And after I'd seen him, coming back to something like this? The only thing that's left of our marriage is that. The only thing.
Just one more question. Mrs. Janice, did you visit your husband's cabin often?
If you're asking if I could have used the gun, I probably could have. But I never went there. I was happier when Dan went up there for the weekends and left me alone. Well, that was a long time ago, and if there's a chance that he could be released, I certainly won't go through with the divorce. After all, he'll need me now more than he ever has before.
Why? Why go around beating your head against a prison gate? Dan Janice was found guilty. Going around digging up old witnesses isn't going to change that.
No, but digging up new information might. Besides, sometimes it simply takes time to bring facts into their proper perspective. Now, how about that bullet?
Oh, take it easy, Herb. This is the age of police science, and a scientist doesn't like to make mistakes.
How about Amy Cross? Were you able to locate her?
Yes, I have her address right here. Kelly Hills Drive. It's practically a wilderness. Come in.
I found what you wanted, Herbert. After the partnership was dissolved, all the remaining assets went to Mrs. Temple.
See what I mean, John? New information.
Oh, hello, Casey. Listen, are you saying that Mrs. Temple shot her husband to frame Janice to get hold of the company?
You've got to admit it's a motive.
If I may have the floor, gentlemen, there's more. Less than a year after the Temple-Janice firm dissolved, Mrs. Temple became a silent partner in the Shaw Construction Company. And the Shaw Construction Company took over most of the unfinished projects of Temple and Janice.
You did say Shaw, didn't you?
Don Shaw, does that mean anything?
Yes, I remember that name when I was going through the Janice file this morning. Yes, here it is. He was a foreman for the Janice Construction Company. Questioned during the investigation. He was also on that paving job, the same when they found the body, huh? Excuse me. Lieutenant Weston, yeah? Yes, Jim, I've been waiting. Oh, thanks. That was a lab, Herb. It's bad news. The bullet in the skull was fired from Dan Janice's gun.
Bullet comparisons proved that Janice's gun had been the murder weapon. It didn't discourage my hope of freeing it. The gun could easily have been secured without Janice's knowledge and returned to the cabin by anyone with a well-laid plan for murder. And Don Shaw had certainly gained from Temple's death.
Excuse me. Are you Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, that's right. Here you go, Norm. What can I do for you?
Lieutenant Weston, Police Department. This is Mr. Maris, an attorney. We'd like to ask you some questions.
Well, Mr. Shaw,
How do you do?
they concern the old Janice case. You were the foreman of the firm at the time of Temple's death, weren't you?
Well, sure, I worked there, but I don't think I could tell you very much. Temple was a real backbone of the outfit. A hustler. He knew how to handle people. He'd be out lining up jobs while Dan Janice sat in the office and played with a slide rule. But I didn't know either one of them very well.
The company had public contracts with the city and the state, didn't they? Did Temple go out and line those up? Is that what you mean by knowing how to handle people?
Look, I was just a foreman. Business was good. I got a paycheck every week. That's all I cared about.
But you did benefit from Temple's death and Janice's conviction, didn't you?
Now, wait a minute.
Without that and Mrs. Temple's backing, you wouldn't have been able to take over the company's incompleted projects, would you?
I thought you said you came here to ask me some questions.
Well, I'll rephrase it. Isn't it a fact that the murder put you into business?
Well, isn't that the kind of a question the law says I can refuse to answer on the grounds it might incriminate me?
Anytime you want to run down on the law, Mr. Shaw, you just come down to headquarters. I'll see that you get it.
Never mind, Lieutenant. Let's go. Thank you for your time.
I should have taken him in on general principles.
But what could you charge him with, Lieutenant?
I'd find something. Oh, you lawyers.
Let's go see Amy Cross.
Well, I warned you, Herb. Kelly Hills Drive was practically a wilderness.
It's just that when the sidewalks run out, you're out of your element, John.
Just as I thought, Herb, a waste of time.
Gentlemen, well, there's no point in leaving now. The damage is done.
Miss Krause?
You frightened him away.
Frightened who away?
Oh, I've been waiting all week to watch that cardinal, and now he's gone.
I'm sorry, we didn't know.
And it's been such a long time since I've seen a cardinal, and heaven knows when he'll come back here. What do you want?
Well, this is Lieutenant Weston of the police department.
How do you do?
And I'm Herbert Maris, Dan Janis's attorney.
Oh, that poor man. He doesn't look like the kind that would go around killing people.
There's a bare possibility he didn't kill his partner.
Shh. I think he's back.
I think you're mistaken, Miss Krause. That isn't a cardinal. It's a thrush.
I don't see anything.
He's gone, John.
Oh, isn't that too bad?
Oh, no, not at all. It's quite a relief, really. A thrush is a darling, but a cardinal's a treasure. I see you know something about birds, Mr. Maris.
Oh, yes, Mr. Maris is quite an authority on the eagle. Ever since he heard the expression, legal eagle.
Oh, a magnificent bird. If only he didn't have that dreadful instinct of the conqueror.
Yes, I quite agree. But even the eagle has some justification for seeking its prey.
You're right, Mr. Maris. It's so hard to be objective. Every bird has its justifications. If only there was a sanctuary where they could mingle freely and freedom without fear. Now, you're a lawyer. Why don't you work out some kind of a law that will protect my birds, huh?
Well, I'll give it some thought.
Well, thank you. But you're here to see about Mr. Janis. Come inside, please.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I think you ought to give that a lot of thought, really.
Miss Krause, according to Mrs. Temple, you weren't exactly a fan of hers.
Oh, I certainly am not. Oh, she's a money grabber. She sued for every penny left in that company. Did she try to talk you out of helping Mr. Janis?
Yes, she did.
Oh, she's a dreadful woman. She's afraid if Mr. Janis is freed that he'll ask the courts to return some of his money. This is Blue Boy.
Think back, Miss Krause. Can you recall any connection between Don Shaw and Mrs. Temple?
You mean a triangle?
Well, anything like that you might have noticed at the time. How often did Mrs. Temple come to the office when Shaw was there?
Oh, I don't remember anything out of the ordinary. This is Mary and John.
Mary, John.
Mrs. Temple was there a few times when Shaw was. But
How long?
all the foremen came in from time to time.
How long had Shaw been with the company at the time of Temple's disappearance?
Oh, not long. A month, perhaps. This is Goldie. Mr. Sherman sent him to see Mr. Temple.
Riley Sherman? But he said he was a friend of Janis's. He didn't even know Temple.
Well, he must have. He sent him to see Mr. Temple for the job. Well, as a matter of fact, now that I think about it, he didn't even want to see Mr. Janis, even though he was in the office. He waited to see Mr. Temple. Mm-hmm. Mary? John?
Goldie? Look, Sherman was a senior member of the building commission at the time. He'd have been in an excellent position to sway the awarding of contracts for the right amount of money.
Yes, that would explain the Sherman-Temple relationship, all right.
And the $40,000 missing from the Janis Temple company.
Yes, but how do you figure Shaw fits into this?
Maybe that was part of the agreement. Somebody on Temple's payroll to protect Sherman's interest. Could your office check back into Sherman's bank account to see if any large deposits were made?
It's a long time ago, Herb. Take a little time, but we can do it.
Mr. Maris, this is Baby. Oh, that poor Mr. Janis. I'd have been to see him, but he'd offered me a contribution for my bird sanctuary, and I was afraid he'd think I came to collect. Oh, I do wish I could help him.
Maybe you can.
My father's suspicion that Amy Krause was the key to Temple's murder was fast becoming a reality. She'd provided me with a possible means of breaking the case.
Now, I don't want you to think that I'm ungrateful. I intend to burn those records in my basement. Well, it just seems a shame that you have to threaten people to get money for a humanitarian cause.
Miss Krause, I'm not paying you to burn those non-existent records. I'm making a contribution toward your bird sanctuary. Now, we both know I never received anything outside of my regular paycheck from Temple. How many other people have you made this pitch to?
Only the people with a motive for killing Mr. Temple. Oh, I must say that you're taking it better than Mrs. Temple. Oh, she was very ungracious. I'm going to see Mr. Sherman next. He always seemed like a generous kind of a man.
What sort of records do you have on him?
Well, my theory is that he promised a contract and he couldn't deliver, and well, I believe the term is welched on the deal. Yes. And Mr. Temple got very upset, and he threatened to call the police, and do you think it'll work?
Oh, I think you're a very brave woman, Miss Krause. For your sake, I hope he didn't do it.
Oh, my goodness, I hadn't thought of that. Goodbye.
Amy Krause, it's been years. You know, I didn't believe my ears when you called. What have you been doing all these years?
Oh, I managed to keep busy with my birds and other projects. I didn't even think you'd remember me.
How can I ever forget you, my dear? I only wish you had called sooner. Won't you sit down? Now, you said you needed some help. Just what is it you want?
Well, I've decided to sell my house and move. For some reason, the birds seem to be leaving the area. Perhaps it's getting too civilized. Well, at any rate, I want to find a new place.
Fine. You locate what you want, and I'll send a van and some men down to give you a hand.
Well, it's not quite that simple, Mr. Sherman. I thought I might move to the south of France, and that'll take a great deal more money than I have. Look, there's a warbler.
France? Now, look, Amy, I'll help any way I can. But I don't think I can offer much help on a move of that scale.
You know, that's the first warbler I've seen this season. Well, with all the talk about them opening the Janus matter again, well, I just don't want to become involved. And, well, I'm sure that you don't want your dealings with Mr. Temple to be rehashed now, do you?
Dealings with Temple?
Oh, I know all about that. I kept his personal books for him. In fact, they're still in the basement.
Amy, why didn't you bring this up at the trial?
Nobody asked me. Besides, what possible good would it do to show that Mr. Temple gave you all that money? It wouldn't bring him back now, would it? Look, there's that wobbler again. Ooh, I wish I brought my camera.
Amy, I think you deserve that trip to France. And I'm going to send you there myself.
And I'll drive you down to buy the ticket, Miss Krause.
Done!
It'll give me a chance to show you the site of my next construction project. We start work tomorrow on a little paving job just outside of town.
Don, we've had one paving job too many.
You never did have any guts.
Please, Mr. Shaw, no.
You better sit down, Amy. You're beginning to look a little pale.
Now, look here, I don't know what this is all about, but I'm not going to let myself get railroaded into a murder charge. Shaw and Mrs. Temple are the only ones that profited by the murder. He killed Temple.
There you go again, being generous. Giving somebody else credit that you deserve. Mrs. Temple didn't know anything about it.
Sherman used his influence to get you on the payroll so you could take care of Temple if he got objectionable when the contract didn't come through, didn't he?
Yeah. Sherman gave all the instructions. Any more questions?
Not at the present time, but I think I have enough to book you. Both of you, come on.
Thank you, Amy. You should have been an actress.
There go two more I can add to my collection.
What do you mean?
Those two, they're birds. Jailbirds. Oh, come in.
Amy, how can I thank you?
Well, Mr. Maris is the one you should thank. He was the genius behind the plan. Oh, I wouldn't have dared go through with it if I hadn't have known they were nearby.